have been waiting most of my life to have a relevant moment to share this.
We as individuals are always reflecting.
For some reason on this day, I had in my possession
and shed some light
a red light bulb.
that promote the reflection of not only our light, but the light of others.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today, reflection and refraction.
Hello, welcome to Truth Be Told 2.0. I'm Reverend Ryan Alexander, and this is Soul Evolution Collaborative. And so this whole month, we've been talking about recovering the light. And not like recovering as in putting something over it, but recovering, like discovering, learning, kind of being curious, digging in to that light that is within all of us, and really beginning to recover. We're beginning to remember. We're beginning to move in ways that actually reflect and bring that light to the surface. And so this week we are talking about reflection and refraction. And so this whole month we thought it'd be really fun to take the kind of the physical kind of science 101 perspective of light and see how that translates into life, into our spiritual life, into just life in general, and how we interact with not only ourselves, with others, but with the world around us. And so today we are talking about reflection and refraction. Try to say that 3 times really fast. And so this is an opportunity for us to take a closer look at how these show up, not only in the physical world, but in our life. So as you can already tell, we have a lot of fun here on Truth Be Told. So sit back and relax and enjoy this episode of Truth Be Told 2.0.
I have been waiting most of my life to have a relevant moment to share this fact. Did you know if you are in a dark room and shine a red light on a red object that it will look white? When I was like 6 years old, I found this out one day completely unintentionally. I was in our basement playing with my Matchbox cars, like 6-year-olds do. No idea why, but for some reason on this day, I had in my possession a red light bulb. Well, as a 6-year-old, that was like the coolest thing ever. And I couldn't just do nothing with it, so of course I took a flashlight and went around taking out all of the other light bulbs, screwed in this red one, flicked the switch, and a single dim red light shone down on all of those Matchbox cars. Well, to my amazement, confusion, and slight worry, my favorite car, being red, had been ruined. It had turned white. So quite hastily, I shone my flashlight on it, and thank God, somehow it was still red. When I turned the flashlight off, the car was white again. Somewhere along the line, my dad entered the scene, and as dads do, I got a whole science lesson on reflection, refraction, and even absorption. Well, that's exactly what we're talking about today, reflection and refraction. So let's start with refraction. Refraction is the change in the direction of a wave passing from one medium to another. Now that sounds super obvious and clear, right? It occurs whenever light travels at an angle into a substance with a different refractive index or optical density, changing the speed of that light while passing through the substance. So the simple version, this is what it looks like when a beam of light hits the surface of a pool, and it looks like that beam of light bends when it hits the water. This is the literal understanding of refraction. But let's take a look at some of the possible metaphysical understandings as part of our metaphor of light for this series. What information comes at us in life that when it meets us is then changed, bent, maybe even distorted a little bit? Potentially, I think a lot. I think there's a lot of information like that. What comes to mind first are those things we hear growing up that kind of become our inner voice as adults, beneficial or not. And being a parent myself, I have seen firsthand how my very well-intentioned redirections have landed in a less than desirable way. A simple, "Hey, let me help you do that easier," often turns into a, "I'm dumb, I must not be doing this right." Refraction. Yeah? Words enter, bend, get reinterpreted, right? The speed of our words change dramatically as they enter another person and get reinterpreted. I think this is what happens with all of us to some degree. As adults, we are still letting the light of others refract through us as commentary on our own lives. The words, well-intentioned or not, get filtered through our specific density, and the speed of those words changes as they become different things. Perhaps we do this with others as well, shining our light out into the world with certain expectations. But then when our light meets the variety of structures in the world in ways that don't meet our expectations, our light becomes refracted. It changes, it bends, it's distorted from what our initial intentions were. Well, refraction might not be all bad either, right? Refraction might be considered learning as well. Thinking we understand something, but then to see it in a new and different way. We only know what we know when we know it. So to learn something new would require a change of information, a bending of light, a change of speed, a new angle. So refraction can probably be many things in our metaphor of light. It can show up as our sense of self-worth and self-love. It might be our expectations meeting the world. It could even be the way that we learn. So I want to offer you this. Consider how else your light might bend when it meets other surfaces in our world. We are setting aside the 31 days of December to honor and celebrate the light, that which animates and sustains life. Each and every evening of the month, the Soul Evolution Collaborative will be live online on Facebook and YouTube to lead the community and all those participating in a few short moments of recognition and celebration of the many ways in which the light shows up in our lives. For more information, go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org/events.
Within this conversation of recovering the light, reflection is another key concept of the physical nature of light that we can also understand from a metaphysical perspective. Reflection is defined as the throwing back by a body or surface of light, heat, sound without actually absorbing it. And so we see physical examples of this when light reflects in mirrors or water surfaces or colored objects. But how does this idea of reflection translate to life, to our life? There are a lot of directions I could go, but I'm going to focus on one perspective. We as individuals are always reflecting. We're reflecting through our thoughts, our beliefs, our actions, our words, how we interact with others, how we interact with ourselves. Every action, every interaction, we are reflecting based on our awareness and our understanding of who we are, from our own awareness of our light, that inward essence of being, that divine thing that is present in all of us. And sometimes we catch really clear glimpses of it, and sometimes we don't. And not making that right or wrong, it's just simply what is. Sometimes we have a really clear view, and sometimes we're like that guy sitting in the stadium behind the pole, and we can't really see a thing. So what's cool about this idea of reflection is that that is fluid, it's not static. So if we're not showing up in ways or reflecting in ways that we would like, we really have the opportunity to practice inner reflection, or what I like to call curiosity, and shed some light. There's that word again, light, that we're talking about. Shed some light on the things that have gotten in the way or blocked us from our own awareness of our light, thus impacting how we reflect outwardly. We can then begin to move and shift or even completely change our beliefs and perspectives. And the truth is that we're always reflecting. And through curiosity, we can do that more intentionally and less from a space of autopilot or default. Now, that's on an individual level, but it also applies on this collective level. It is imperative that we begin to create systems and frameworks, safe and brave spaces, containers of belonging and connection that promote the reflection of not only our light, but the light of others. And so this freedom of reflection becomes community care in a way that supports and nurtures everyone's process in becoming to a greater awareness of their light. And we're always reflecting, like I've said. The more we're aware of our truth, of our own light, the more that we're able to show up in ways that reflect that, the more that we're able to show up authentically, reflecting our authentic self, and then inviting others to do the same.
Yeah, so many thoughts about this topic. I don't even know if this part made it into the actual video or not, but we accidentally combined the word reflection with the word refraction, and it became refraction.
Refraction.
And so we've been trying desperately not to accidentally say refraction. No,
Refraction.
the whole episode. But I think maybe that's it, because I don't know scientifically speaking the truth to this, but I would imagine that there are many times where we are reflecting and refracting simultaneously. Like, with refraction, the example is like the water, the beam of light hits the water in the pool, and the beam of light changes.
Mm-hmm.
But I would imagine the water is also reflecting light. I mean, you get ripples in the water, and the light reflects back. So it is both reflecting and refracting. It is refracting.
You know what when you were talking about refraction, and it was interesting, just the take in general, how we take in information and then it gets bent in certain ways, and also, refracting, shows up in those things that serve to kind of block our awareness of reflection. So it's like that thing that stands in the way that it does kind of bend that light. I also thought about, I wonder if that also is kind of like these stories that we create. These stories, we take in information, and maybe we don't have all the information, or maybe from our own experiences in a similar situation, or our own triggers, our own whatever, we take that information in, and then it gets sometimes it gets scrambled, not even refracted. It just gets scrambled.
Yeah.
And I don't know that that's a property of light that we could cover, but we'll cover it now. It gets scrambled, and then we create this story, and then we begin to live from that story, not only in that moment, but then every other time that similar situation comes up, we get in this kind of default now of reacting the same way.
When I was doing some additional information seeking about this topic, I realized there's actually at least two other ideas that fall into this same kind of column, and the other, absorption and scattering. And so when you were saying about, like, we take the information and it just starts getting all bouncy and going all over the place, it's like, yeah, we are scatter. We can scatter light, and that's where, like, the light hits a surface and bounces in all kinds of different directions. And they start to sound like personality traits that we all kind of like move through. Like, sometimes I reflect, sometimes I refract, sometimes I scatter, sometimes I'm absorbed. It's like, yeah, those are all I know those experiences well.
And so in that way, I think it does, that conversation of refraction and reflection kind of are similar, because then we have an opportunity to be curious about, oh, I have reacted in that same way. I've reflected in the same way, and I don't even remember why now. And so then we have that opportunity to then do that inner looking, inner bouncing back, and getting curious about that, and then being like, oh, that's what that's about. I like this week. I think the metaphor, and I know we're probably taxing the metaphor a bit, but I think this week's taxing of the metaphor is really interesting. It brings up a lot of stuff.
Taxing, testing the boundaries. I don't know. I mean, a little of both, maybe.
Well, I mean, yeah,
But
that's what we like to do, right?
I mean, it's helpful. It's been helpful for me, and I know, like, I mean, we know in advance what we're talking about, and it's still helpful. So I can imagine
Mm.
there is at least someone out there who this information is helpful to, if not many.
Oh, and this
But
is an important comment.
we
Or
act
we
like a
act like a
prism.
prism and only pull out one color or meaning and miss the big picture of what is happening or being said.
Yes, it almost feels like it's like one of those word games where you're trying to get other people to guess a word,
Oh,
you know,
yeah,
like
I love
password or
those.
something, right?
Yeah.
And so you're trying to get your other, you know, your teammate or your team to guess the word that's written on this thing. And, you know, how often do you have somebody who's trying to guess the word and like whatever your clues are, they're interpreting in one way and it's sending them down like a very singular path. And you're like, no, 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 that's not, no. In your mind, it's so clear as this. But then other times you have a teammate where you're like, okay, yeah, you're here. I know you well enough to know like we're on the same page here, and
Right.
the words, the clues I'm giving are we're like immediate. You're gonna get it right away, you know. Or even like Pictionary, you're drawing a thing, and they're like, it's a jackal. It's a jack. It's like it's not a jackal.
Pineapple, pineapple.
You know, a moment ago you're talking about texture. It's like, yeah, talk about texture of life, like the bumps and ridges and the contouring and the parts that feel like sandpaper that rub down some of the rough edges. It's like
Yeah.
without that texture, we don't have the sanding of the edges and stuff.
It's important to realize whether we're talking about refraction or reflection, that it is not like this permanent state, that it is fluid. We do have the opportunity to observe those areas, and actually begin to say, that's not exactly what I meant, like if you're communicating with someone, and then that draws us into a closer connection with that person as we begin to want to make ourselves more clear, or to, so it's like all these things are, they're calling us to like the next step of things, right? If we're not reflecting in the way that we want to, the next step of, is to begin to look at those things. If we are, the next step of communication, the next step in interaction. So it's not like a right or wrong, like, oh, we're doing this wrong, but it's the experience of life. And I think the more that we're aware of it, the more that we can begin to outpicture in the ways that we would like to, not only individually but collectively too. I mean, I like the collective implications, evaluating, being curious about those things, not only in our society or in our communities, that are refracting people's light or refracting people's expression, or
Or even
scrambling or
or even
scattering.
yeah, or even the idea of reflecting on a collective impact. There is this kind of undertone in the United States where like if you say anything bad about the United States, then you're a traitor. You're gonna, you know, get booted. You should get booted out or put in jail or something. Collective reflection. Can we, as a whole, look at the state of things objectively? You know, removing my opinion about whatever, removing your opinion about whatever, and just really looking at like, oh, what is it that is actually showing up? Like, let's let this experience reflect back to us what is happening. And um I think if we're not in the practice, and this works as a whole, this also works individually, if we're not in the practice of self-reflection, then when we start that, I think it can feel sharp and pointy and abrasive, and especially if our identity is wrapped up in some of that refraction, because I think that's actually what's happened, right? As our identity gets wrapped up in the refraction when we take on information and then maybe lose the original meaning, or the information hasn't evolved, or whatever version of that. When we have like these things that we think about ourselves, when the information gets distorted and our identity gets wrapped up in that, reflection can seem like a challenge. not just challenging, but literally like something is challenging us,
Right.
like to a duel or
Right.
something. I don't know.
But I mean, I do like both of these concepts as a way to support community care, and I think that's, I mean, we talk about that a lot here. I mean, we talk a lot about personal transformation and communal evolution, but I do think, and those terms that we use, I mean, have a bit of a kind of a spiritual sort of hint, a waft of
Wafting of
spirituality.
spirituality.
But I do think it speaks even more to that. I think it speaks to, I'm doing my own sort of inner reflection, my own sort of whatever, and looking at that and understanding that how I reflect in the world, it impacts other people. And not only other people, but it impacts us collectively in ways that we can see. And then, oftentimes more dramatically in the ways that we can't see. And so as we begin to practice this awareness of that, we're always reflecting kind of what's on the inside, or we're reflecting our understanding of what's on the inside. So the more we understand, the more we're aware of the truth of who we are and our authentic self, then the more that we can begin to reflect that on the outside. And then that has kind of a trickle down effect to our collective sort of existence. And then we can begin to look at ways that things are refracted, and truth is refracted, and the essence of and people's voices are refracted, all those sorts of things, to play on the metaphor. And then we can say, oh, no, we don't want to do that. This is what we want. And this is how we want to show up. And then it becomes this sort of movement to this collective care. And I think that is, I just think that that's the essence of inside of us. We want to care and be cared for.
The practice of reflection and observing refraction takes you to this interpersonal work. And following that interpersonal work, it naturally brings you to a place where my further understanding of my reflection and my refraction must include others. And so there's this desire to engage in group reflection and refraction observations. And in doing that, I think that necessarily then progresses back to like one-on-one conversations, having conversations on an individual level, or conversations on a level where my participation in this conversation requires me to go back and again do that personal self-reflection, that personal observation of refraction, and probably even scattering and absorption, right? Like all of the things. How am I playing a part in this? Or how am I absorbing what's being said, or how am I refracting what's being said? How am I misinterpreting, or how have I misinterpreted so that I can begin to reinterpret? And it has this, like, it's this cycle, right? It's this cycle of when we can kind of step out of the way, it's this cycle of like self work and bringing the self work to the group, and the group work comes back to the self, and then the self work. It's just this kind of
like inhale, exhale.
Yeah. I don't think we have to create it, and I certainly don't think we need to force it. I think it just happens. I think we are naturally drawn to this cycle of well, it brings me back to something you said earlier about communication, and wow, understanding what stance I am taking on a particular in a particular conversation. Am I refracting? Am I distorting what's being said? Am I just absorbing what's being said and trying to just fit into the conversation? Am I totally misunderstanding and just scattering and sending that energy and thoughts back out in all different directions? Am I reflecting back to them what they're trying? You know what I mean? Like there's all these different stances, and it's like, oh yeah, that. And for whatever reason, the whole like word game idea just made that super clear, because like, oh, I can I can name in my mind the people who tend to go to
and we're doing that. I mean, all those things that you just described, we're at some level doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that what happens, for me at least, is I have an experience or interaction and whatever, and I've already determined this is the truth of this situation and this is the way it is. But no, instead it's a little bit more nuanced than that. It is, oh, I misinterpreted this, or I came across this way. It is this kind of dance of things. And I think when we're aware of that, when we're aware of kind of how this goes, I think that we can have a lot more grace for ourselves. We can have a lot more grace for others. And then it really creates this awareness of like an intentionality of our interactions, intentionality of the things that we put our attention to, intentionality to those things that we support, asking more questions. The more we practice it, the more then it just becomes a natural flow, a natural kind of, oh, okay, well, maybe I was refracting this, or maybe I wasn't reflecting this. And I think then becomes a natural flow. And I think it begins to support these systems and frameworks and ways of being that, I don't know, just support like the world that we want to live in, supports the life that we want to live, individually and collectively.
It all points back to authenticity, which is probably a word we use just as often as we mention Brene Brown. But can't have an episode where we don't.
Right, of course not.
But I think it does. I think it all points back to authenticity. Like how do these attributes of light help me understand where my experience is trying to point me back to my authentic expression? If we can express authentically, it doesn't mean we're not reflecting and refracting and all the things. I think it means we're doing them more gracefully, and it's kind of like there's a healthy version and an unhealthy version, and I think the authenticity puts our needle further into the healthy version.
And I think that should be the goal for all of us, right? The needle into the healthy version.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Truth Be Told 2.0, Reflection and Refraction. And so as you can see, there's a lot that goes into it. But the thing for me that comes up the most is to get curious about all aspects of it. And we know that curiosity really is that spiritual superpower that kind of calls us to look at things differently, or explore things, or explore how we can create new things in our world. And so applying this superpower of curiosity to this understanding of recovering our light. And so notice that it's not discovering our light, or it's not bringing our light back. Our light is always there. So it's recovering it. It's remembering. It's looking and saying, oh, there it is. I knew it was there. I just couldn't see it. And so this whole month is an exploration of getting curious about those things that may stand in our way. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Truth Be Told. This week, if you want to kind of take a deeper dive into this conversation, in maybe a little bit different way, a more interactive way, we have our weekly gathering on Thursday evenings at 7 p.m. You can sign up for that and get the link on our website, soulevolutioncollaborative.org. If you want to continue to explore this conversation in a kind of communal way, we have our Second Sunday experience. Now, it's not on the second Sunday, it's every Sunday, but it's just the second thing that we offer on Sunday. And that is every Sunday at 7 p.m. And we get together and we kind of take a spiritual practice, or a practice or an activity that kind of deepens our awareness of the topic for the week. And so there are lots of ways to get involved. If we don't see you on Thursday or Sunday, we'll see you back here next Tuesday. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Truth Be Told.